Welcome to a presentation on Myles Standish, defender of the Pilgrims and of the Massasoit in Sowams. My name is Dr. David Weed, coordinator of the Sowams Heritage Area Project, and I'll be your host for this presentation. The area around Warren, Rhode Island was once called Sowams by the first people to occupy that area over the past 10,000 years until the arrival of Europeans. This was the home of the Massasoit Osamequin, who met the Pilgrims in 1621. The Pokanoket tribes he led occupied Sowams, or the southern area of what is today part of Massachusetts and all of East Bay, Rhode Island. This area is sometimes referred to as Wampanoag, but in fact it was Pokanoket. While dozens of ships had been seen off the coast of Massachusetts, it wasn't until the arrival of the Mayflower that the English came over to settle a colony. Just after a pandemic that killed 90% of the Pokanokets along the coast, the Massasoit was looking for an alliance that would keep the Massachusetts to the north and the Narragansetts to the west from attacking his people. On March 22, 1621, two Pokanoket Indians appeared in the village of Plymouth and asked if they could meet. The Indian Samoset had learned a smattering of English from sailors along the Maine coast. Another Indian, Squanto, spoke the language well because English explorers had captured him and taken him to England as a slave. Knowing the Massasoit wished to have trade and maintain peace, they arranged to meet. They sat down together and wrote a 6-point treaty specifying no harm to one another and providing for the mutual defense of each. They also agreed that matters of justice would be handled on each side by their own people. That agreement remained in force for over 50 years. At the time of the treaty, it had only been 4 months since the Mayflower arrived on the shores of America. The English settlers were still living either in temporary dwellings on the shore or on board the Mayflower. But they had guns and someone with military experience, Myles Standish. Standish had lived in Leiden, Holland, with his wife Rose, and was a friend of separatist Robinson, so he already knew the Pilgrims. Standish was hired to accompany them for his military experience and expertise to defend the colony from what were presumed to be savage Indians. While we only have one rendering of him, there's been a lot of speculation about what he looked like. Author Nathaniel Philbrick describes him as a small man with a broad, powerful physique and reddish hair. Author Rebecca Fraser refers to him as a small, bristly, red-faced member of the church. He was so short he had to cut 6 inches off his rapier in order to carry it without it dragging on the ground. Philbrick said he had haughty impulsiveness. Hubbard describes him as a man of very little stature, yet of very hot and angry temper. Boren says, to strap on his sword seemed the answer to any and all problems on the diplomatic front. Nathaniel Morton, Secretary of Plymouth Colony, wrote in his New England's Memorial, published in 1669, that Standish was born in Lancashire, England, around 1584. Heir apparent unto a great estate of lands, his great-grandfather was a second or younger brother from the house of Standish. He became acquainted with the church at Leiden, Holland, and came over unto England, quote, with such of them as they first set out for the planting of the plantation of New Plymouth. He was a lieutenant in the English force, serving in the Netherlands, and was a veteran of the Dutch wars, having been wounded in 1601. The next morning, after signing the treaty, the Massasoit asked for a return visit to his campsite in Plymouth. Standish and Isaac Alderton were chosen to make this call, and they were received enthusiastically by Massasoit and his followers. He gave the 3 or 4 ground nuts and some tobacco. Afterwards, a brisk business was established between London, Plymouth, and Sowams. According to Travers, following that in 1621, at one time a group of Narragansett Indians attacked the Massasoit and killed one of his followers. Again, this particular instance was handled by Myles Standish and his army of 8 or 10 men, who merely fired 2 of their muskets and successfully ended the affair. According to author James Warren, not long after learning of the agreement, Canonicus sent a war party to support a raid on Massasoit's home village of Sowams near Warren, Rhode Island, undertaken by a disgruntled Wampanoag minor sachem named Corbitant. Corbitant worked to turn the people against the Massasoit in the Pokanoket village of Nemanskett, and now the site of Middleborough, Massachusetts, about 14 miles west of Plymouth. While Standish and colonists were on Cape Cod, a Narragansett contingent attacked the Massasoit and drove him from his village of Sowams. There was a rumor that Massasoit had been captured by the Pocasset sachem. Bradford sent 2 trusted interpreters to determine what was happening in Nemanskett, Tisquantum, known to the English as Squanto, and Habamuck. Tisquantum had been pivotal in providing counsel and aid to the Pilgrims, ensuring the survival of the colony. Habamuck, another influential ally, was a Payanisi, a high-ranking advisor to Massasoit, and a warrior who commanded particular respect and fear among Native Americans. When Tisquantum and Habamuck arrived in Nemanskett, they found that the rumor was not true, but Corbitant took them captive and threatened to kill them. Habamuck escaped to Warren, Plymouth. When news of Corbitant's imminent revolt reached Myles Standish, he persuaded both the Pilgrims and the Pokanokets that decisive action was called for. Strapping on his swords, Standish hurried to Middleborough and swiftly quelled the mutiny by attacking the village, wounding several Indians and freeing Squanto and Tocomoman. Standish had failed to capture Corbitant, but the raid had the desired effect. On September 13, 1621, 9 sachems, including Canicum of Manamet, Epinau of the Vineyard, and Quatacrina, came to Plymouth, including Corbitant, to sign a treaty of loyalty to King James and to negotiate a peace treaty between the English and the Pocasset. Soon thereafter, Canonicus signaled his displeasure and resolve by sending a bundle of arrows in a snakeskin to Governor William Bradford at Plymouth to protect his people against the Puritan Wampanoag encroachment. Bradford responded with a snakeskin filled with powder and shot to signal his ability to defend himself. Thomas Weston was a wealthy London merchant, an ironmonger, and one of the original backers of the Plymouth colonists' plantation in the New World. In the spring of 1622, he sent 67 male settlers to establish a colony under a separate patent at Wessagusset, now Quincy, Massachusetts. When the settlers at Wessagusset mistreated and stole from the Massachusetts Indians, Bradford learned from the Massasoit in March 1623 that the tribe was plotting a surprise attack on both Wessagusset and Plymouth. Bradford ordered Myles Standish to plan and execute a surprise attack. Reaching Nemanskett, Standish planned a night attack on the wigwam in which Corbitant was believed to be sleeping. That night, he and Habamuck burst into the shelter, shouting for Corbitant. As frightened Pokanokets attempted to escape, Englishmen outside the wigwam fired their muskets, wounding a Pokanoket man and woman who were later taken to Plymouth to be treated. During the encounter, Standish lured Indians, Pekasut, Witisamut, and 2 others into the stockade at Wessagusset and attacked and killed them. Standish cut off Wutawamet's head and stuck it on a pole in Plymouth as a warning, since that's what they did with traitors' heads in England. Standish soon learned that Corbitant had already fled the village and Tisquantum was unharmed. Standish's brutal raid attracted the notice of the Narragansetts and Massachusetts tribes and warned them off of future attacks. After Nemaskett, Corbitant ran back to Mattapoisett, now Gardiner's Neck and Swansea. He later appeared before the English at Plymouth in September 1621 to make amends for his conduct. A trading post was established on the Kickamuit River in Sowams in 1632 to trade furs for English goods. The English wanted to keep the Dutch from trading with the Pokanokets. The post was likely built on the west bank of the river where the Bristol County Water Authority now sits on Child Street in Warren. Later, Pilgrim Myles Standish visited and called Sowams the Garden of the Patent and the flower of the garden because it was already cleared and ready for planting and grazing animals. In 1653, the Massasoit Osamequin and Wamsutta, his eldest son, sold a large tract of land from the Providence River to the Taunton River. Myles Standish was one of the purchasers, though he never lived there. The land later became the town of Swansea and was divided off into the towns of Barrington and Warren. Standish received a farm of 120 acres in what became Duxbury, north of Plymouth. He built a house and settled there around 1628. Standish died on October 3, 1656, of strangulation or strangury, a condition often associated with kidney stones or bladder cancer. His daughter Laura had died in 1655, and Myles asked to be buried beside her a year later when he died in his home in Duxbury in 1656 at the age of 72. Abimuck had lived in Duxbury with Standish. With the death of Myles Standish, the military affairs of the colony fell increasingly into the hands of young Josiah Winslow. In his time, Standish demonstrated a brutality that angered Native Americans and disturbed more moderate members of the colony. But he supported and defended the Pilgrim colony for much of his life, though there is no evidence to suggest that he ever joined their church. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote The Courtship of Myles Standish in 1858. Historian Tudor Jenks wrote that Longfellow's book had no claim to be considered other than a pleasant little fairy story, and as an entirely misleading sketch of men and matters in Old Plymouth. However, the book elevated Standish to the level of folk hero in Victorian America. In the late 19th century Duxbury, the book generated a movement to build monuments to Standish in his honor, a beneficial byproduct of which was increased tourism to the town. Now you can go to Duxbury and climb a 116-foot granite shaft topped by a 14-foot statue of Captain Myles Standish completed in 1898. The monument offers panoramic views of the South Shore church spires, several 19th century lighthouses, Duxbury Beach, Plymouth Harbor, and the Blue Hills of Massachusetts.